What is the dollar? The US dollar is the official currency of the United States of America. Its symbol is $, and its global international code in banks and markets is USD. However, the dollar is not just a domestic currency within America. Today, it is the most important currency in the world because it is used in international trade, central bank reserves, the pricing of oil, gold, wheat, and global commodities, bank transfers, and international debts. Before the dollar, America had no unified currency. Before the founding of the United States, American colonies used various currencies, including the British pound sterling, Spanish coins, French and Dutch coins, bartering at times. The most famous circulating currency in America at the time was the Spanish silver dollar. For this reason, when the United States wanted to establish its own currency, it drew inspiration for the name dollar from the widespread Spanish currency of that era. The official birth of the US dollar. After the United States gained independence from Britain, the new nation needed a unified currency. In 1785, the US Congress adopted the name dollar as the monetary unit for the United States. Official American currency institutions also note that the U.S. adopted the dollar symbol in 1785, which evolved from a sign originally linked to the Spanish peso. Then came the most critical legislation, the Coinage Act of 1792. In 1792, the Coinage Act was passed, which regulated American minting and established the dollar as the official unit. At that stage, the dollar was tied to precious metals, specifically silver, gold. This meant that the dollar's value was not just a piece of paper. It was linked to a specific amount of a precious metal. The dollar in the 19th century. Gold, silver, and wars. The bimetallic system, gold and silver. In the 19th century, the dollar operated mostly under a system called the bimetallic system, meaning the currency was backed by both gold and silver simultaneously. However, this system caused problems. Why? Because market prices for gold and silver fluctuated. If the price of silver rose, for example, people tended to hoard silver or sell it as a metal rather than use it as currency. Consequently, the American government gradually leaned more toward gold. The Civil War and the emergence of paper money. During the American Civil War between the North and the South, the government required massive funding. In 1861, the U.S. Department of the Treasury issued paper notes to finance the war, which were nicknamed greenbacks due to their green color. U.S. currency institutions note that all American currency issued since 1861 remains valid and redeemable at its full face value. At this point, the dollar was no longer just gold or silver coins, but also government-issued paper notes. This was a critical turning point as the world began transitioning from metallic money to paper money. Establishment of the Federal Reserve in 1913. In 1913, the U.S. Central Bank was established under the name Federal Reserve. This bank became responsible for managing monetary policy, controlling interest rates, issuing and regulating the dollar, supporting banks during crises, attempting to manage inflation and unemployment. In other words, the dollar was no longer just a currency issued by the Treasury. It now had a powerful central banking system backing it. The dollar and gold. Why was gold important? For a long time, the dollar was tied to gold. This meant that at certain stages, people or banks could convert dollars into gold at a fixed rate. Gold gave the currency trust because people believed that the paper note was not just paper, but represented an intrinsic gold value. The problem, however, was that the economy grew faster than the supply of gold. If the state could only issue dollars up to the amount of gold it possessed, the economy could become severely constrained. The 1929 crisis and the Great Depression. In 1929, a major crash hit the U.S. stock market, plunging America and the world into a massive economic crisis, known as the Great Depression. Companies collapsed, banks went bankrupt, unemployment soared, and confidence in the economy plummeted. During this period, the United States began rethinking the dollar's relationship with gold, as strict adherence to the gold standard made managing the crisis much harder. Roosevelt and altering the dollar-gold relationship. In the 1930s, under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, the U.S. government took strong measures regarding gold. The free ownership of gold within America was restricted. and the dollar was devalued against gold. The goal was to give the government greater capacity to inject money and stimulate the economy. Here, the dollar began its gradual shift from a strictly gold-backed currency to one relying more heavily on the strength of the nation and its economy. World War II and the rise of the dollar. World War II changed the world. Europe emerged economically devastated, while the United States emerged as the strongest economic, industrial, and financial powerhouse. America possessed massive factories, large gold reserves, a powerful military, an advanced banking system, enormous exports, debts owed to it by other countries. Consequently, the dollar began transforming into the world's primary currency. The Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944. The dollar becomes global king. In 1944, before the end of World War II, major nations gathered at a conference called Bretton Woods, where they agreed on a new global financial system. The core concept of the system was global currencies were pegged to the US dollar. The US dollar was pegged to gold. The price of gold was fixed at $35 per ounce. This meant, for example, that France, Britain, or Japan fixed their currencies against the dollar, and the dollar itself could be converted into gold. Thus, the dollar became the centerpiece of the international financial system. The U.S. Department of State clarifies that the Bretton Woods system pegged foreign currencies to the dollar, while the dollar's value was linked to gold at a price of $35 per ounce. Why did the world accept the dollar? The world accepted the dollar after World War II because America was the strongest power. The United States held nearly most of the world's gold. Its economy was the largest, and many countries desperately needed aid, loans, and reconstruction. Thus, the dollar became a proxy for gold. Any country seeking trade, reserves, or financial stability needed the dollar. The major problem: America printed more dollars than gold. Over time, the United States began spending heavily, particularly on the Vietnam War, foreign aid, military bases, global investments, domestic programs. As a result, a massive amount of dollars spread outside America. However, the U.S. gold supply was insufficient to cover all these dollars at the rate of $35 per ounce. Countries like France began demanding the conversion of their dollars into gold, threatening the stability of the entire system. The Nixon shock of 1971, the end of the gold backing. On August 15, 1971, U.S. President Richard Nixon announced the suspension of the dollar's convertibility into gold. This event is known as the Nixon shock. The Federal Reserve explains that Nixon's team ended the convertibility of the dollar into gold and implemented wage and price controls, which practically brought the Bretton Woods system to an end. This was a watershed moment in economic history. Before 1971, the dollar was tied to gold. After 1971, the dollar was no longer tied to gold. What does it mean that the dollar is no longer backed by gold? Since 1971, the dollar became what is known as fiat money, fiat or credit-based currency. This means that the dollar's value does not come from gold, but rather from people's trust in the U.S. state, the strength of the U.S. economy, the power of the U.S. military, the strength of the banking system, the government's ability to collect taxes, global acceptance of the dollar's dominance over trade, debt, and energy. Simply put, the dollar today does not say, "I am worth gold." It says, "I am worth value because the world trusts me and transacts with me." The dollar, the internet, and financial markets. With the rise of technology, the internet, and U.S. financial markets, the dollar's strength surged even further. Why? Because the world began investing heavily in the New York Stock Exchange, NYSE, American tech companies, U.S. Treasury bonds, American banks, the dollar as a reserve currency. America does not just possess a strong currency, it possesses the deepest financial market in the world. Any major investor, nation, or central bank seeking a safe, liquid haven to store wealth usually purchases dollars or U.S. Treasury bonds. Why can't an ordinary country just print its currency like America? This is a very important question. America prints the dollar, and the dollar is in global demand. In contrast, if a weaker nation prints its currency excessively, its value drops rapidly because the world has no need for it. For instance, if a small nation prints too much money, people lose confidence in it, causing the dollar to surge against it and prices to skyrocket. When America issues dollars, a massive portion of those dollars is absorbed by the world for trade, reserves, and investment. This grants America a massive advantage, often referred to as the exorbitant privilege, meaning America can finance itself using its own currency that the rest of the world requires. Why is the dollar called a hard currency? Because the dollar is globally accepted and easily convertible. A hard currency refers to a stable currency that the world trusts and can be widely used outside its country of origin. Some of the most famous hard currencies include the US dollar, the euro, the British pound, the Swiss franc, the Japanese yen. Yet, the dollar remains number one. Can the dollar collapse? Theoretically, yes. Any currency can weaken or collapse if people entirely lose faith in it. Practically, a collapse of the dollar is highly unlikely at present because the entire world is linked to it. If the dollar were to crash suddenly, immense harm would hit America, China, Europe, oil-producing nations, central banks, global corporations, countries indebted in dollars. Therefore, even America's geopolitical rivals generally do not want a sudden collapse of the dollar. Instead, they seek to gradually reduce their dependence on it over time. Can the Chinese yuan replace the dollar? China is a massive economic powerhouse, and the yuan is expanding internationally. However, for the yuan to take the dollar's place, the world needs total trust in it. Here lie several obstacles. China imposes strict capital controls on the movement of money. The Chinese financial system is not as open as the American system. Investors demand the freedom of unrestricted entry and exit of capital. The dollar commands a long history of global trust. U.S. bond markets are significantly deeper and more liquid. Therefore, the yuan may increase its global share, but it has not become a full alternative to the dollar yet. Can the euro replace the dollar? The euro is incredibly strong, but it also does not fulfill all the criteria of the dollar. Its primary challenge is that the Eurozone consists of many different countries with separate fiscal policies. America is a single nation with a single treasury and a single massive unified bond market. Europe, on the other hand, comprises Germany, France, Italy, Spain, and others. Thus, the euro is a vital competitor, but it has not replaced the dollar. The golden conclusion. The dollar did not become powerful simply because it is a green piece of paper. It is powerful because it stands ahead of a massive economy, a formidable military, deep banks, immense financial markets, dollar-priced oil, and global debts denominated in dollars. However, the dollar's power today is not as absolute as it was following World War II. The world has begun exploring partial alternatives like gold, the yuan, and local currencies. Nonetheless, the dollar remains the world's premier currency today, and replacing it quickly is no easy task.
If you liked the video, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and share the video. See you next time.